Blizz trying to make delves irrelevant? It's a very good question.
Would be counter to Blizzard's own interests.
We've got a small problem here. You may have noticed it already. We're saying delves a lot, but we're only talking about Zekfir. Zekfir is a delve, but is also not a delve.
Yes.
Zekfir is a boss fight. Making Zekfir irrelevant is entirely necessary to make their delves relevant. And Zekfir probably should never have awarded you anything outside of one-time kill cosmetics.
I think they needed something... They needed a bit of a different conception for how some of this stuff works. Because you're right. The thing... Nerfs are very unpopular, and I understand why. Especially if they're done... Especially if they are done in a ham-fisted way, or in those cases where there's a very reactionary nerf, and there should be something on the other side of that. So I get why sometimes, things go wrong. What you said's completely right. If Zekfir was giving you loot in the vault for every kill, you would never do any other delve at all. Because you would just do Zekfir 8 times in 20 minutes. Because he takes probably now under 90 seconds to kill. And then the rest of delves no longer exist because there's one thing. It reminds me of Diablo 4. When that game came out, there was this... and this is not me talking about the class nerfs. Because it seemed like they went heavy in class nerfs. They didn't really have buffs to compensate. And I guess in a game where you're kind of investing into a build, that's more of a problem. But you'd have 1 or 2 dungeons that would be busted, right? They'd be way more efficient when you're leveling. And then Blizzard would nerf them. And then people would say, oh, fun place. Then it's a bit weird because, okay, if the fastest way, because people do optimize, so if the fastest way to play the game is to just chain grind 1 dungeon for 8 hours, that's probably not going to be fun. And people will probably burn out. Or they'll probably hit max level, but because they only did one thing, they will not have game context and stuff that they're supposed to know by the time they're that level. Now, the problem in Blizzard's case with Diablo 4 is the rest of the leveling experience was too slow and was not fun, which is what created the player appetite to sort of chain run the dungeons like that. I think with this and Zekfir, I just don't think, and actually with some delve stuff in general, I just don't think they had a massively, I don't want to say well thought out, but maybe they could have done with a bit of iteration.
Delves are and this is something, they've been happier to do it, and I think this is one of the first times in a little while they haven't erred on the side of caution and it's bit them. Not that this is a major thing, right? This isn't a gigantic mistake they made. This isn't a black mark on the story of the War Within going forward. But I think it is a case of they wanted to tie it into the pillar of Endgame. And that's fine, and it's a good idea in the long term for solo players and things like that. Mm-hmm. But it got a little bit too close to the specifically Torghast-shaped sun. Because delves in general were rewarding way above their difficulty curve, but also the nature of the Great Vault means that if you're a player, you want to fill every single slot because of the nature of it.
If you don't, you're not a player.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be on ahead, I don't want to say ahead of the curve, but you know what I mean. You want to be on top of the gearing, right? If you want to have the best chance of getting tier as soon as you can,
you do not want to experience the FOMO.
Yeah, and that's a reality of what it was. And I think they maybe looked and saw how little people did PvP and went, we're probably safe to yeet that, and that was better for PvP as well. Okay, we're probably safe because the people don't want to do delves, they just won't. But then they probably forgot that the difference between any other PvE content and PvP is nuts. So what they've done is they've, in a way that we kind of had this coming. They basically turned the Great Vault into more chores. They turned delves into more chores by virtue of it being such an outsized reward. That the equivalent is insane. Delves probably should have limited you substantially earlier and in the scheme of an endgame, in the scheme of like a heroic raider or even a normal raider, they should probably have stopped being rewarding. And that's the awkward part of designing them to be gearing.
Yeah,
to be part of the end game.
It runs counter to what I want, which is I want a reason to do a tier 11 delve instead of the current reason, which is there's no reason.
Yeah.
Right? Like that would be good. If those were, I mean, actually I haven't really done any, but if those were somehow hard enough to be worth like a gilded crest, I mean, I'd do that shit. Sure. So, yeah, it's really challenging purely because the Great Vault reward is so disproportional compared to the not Great Vault reward. And I guess you could look at some of this and think, a tier 8 should probably give you champion gear in the vault. Like a champion 8/8 or something. If it was more commensurate with difficulty.
7/8 because you don't want to kill the whole.
True.
You don't want to kill the whole thing. But then the problem is, if you give them a champion 7/8, where do they get the upgrade for that? It's a ruined crest.
And then so the thing's going to be, if you do that at 8, and now an 8 makes sense in the difficulty, it does, it kind of behooves you to scale that baby up, so that you can get raid stuff from a plus 11. Or, you can get hero gear from a plus 11.
Then you loop back round to it being a chore for heroic raiders.
But then it's tricky because could it be a chore to heroic raiders? Yes. Is it also content that would be enjoyable for heroic raiders as an option? Yes. And I guess the problem with the Great Vault is it's sort of independent tracks.
Yeah.
Now, even you could say a solution to this is that your Great Vault does not operate the way that it does right now, and it's so delineated between the different bits of content that you can just fill that thing up by doing content, depending on how hard the content is. I'm sure you could work out a system like that. But then you could run into the problem where, one way it'll be faster to fill up the Great Vault, so we'll do that instead. And I guess that's the problem with hyper-optimization behavior and with being rooted in the fear that it's too much of a chore. Because, technically, could it be a chore for me? Yes. But I've got plenty of gear from other places. And I don't have... I feel like the sources of gear are varied enough and paced, especially with the catalyst and with the crafting system, that the notion of, oh dear, it'll become a chore, is that really as big as it used to be?
Not as big as it used to be, but it's still there. It's still there, mostly because some of this is down to itemization as well, right? Where some of this is the hunt for Biss, the eternal hunt for Biss, the eternal hunt for heroic bits of tier.
And the hunt for Biss is fine to exist.
It's just when it comes to particular itemization, I think that's that's what keeps the vault being a danger point, because a vault is a good case for your bits because of the upside chance to get very rare items, things like that. I think some of it also boils down to alts and things like that as well, because playing one character or filling all 9 vault slots is a decent ask. Playing 2, I hope you don't have a job or really a family or friends. That's the kind of point it gets into when it comes to the time ask to be optimal on multiple characters. And that's when people want to play the game optimally, and that's how a large part of your culture's kind of bent, then that's the kind of issue you run into by having that ask.
It's uncomfortable really to weird, me that is an expectation that people see as reasonable.
Yeah, but it's you look at it, and it's the reason people were happy that Zach Veer got them their Great Vault really quickly was because then they could have that. They could have that with less time investment. And that's the awkward part where...
So the thing with the Great Vault currently is it creates a fear and an anxiety. And I think even though people know statistically that it's not humongously likely that them going completely extra will get them an upgrade or will be so amazing for the status of their character. Because if you crunch the numbers and you think about time and low-hanging fruit, it's not. I think it is anxiety. And I guess I start to think about like so much human behavior, doom scrolling about on Netflix, 20 minutes to find out what show you're going to do, whatever it may be. So much of that is avoidance of anxiety and being able to just go and do something. So I think if you offer people a way to tick off some sort of cognitive box that also blurs away some time, I think that's fulfilling a need, right? So if you give people the Great Vault and you say, because with PvP it was not really as much of a problem, because you would look at the PvP row and say that's not for me, so I won't do it.
Just PvP gear as well.
Yeah. Whereas now, if you give people, oh, you could do all of this, oh, well, now suddenly they're not thinking, oh my, I'm a Disney character in a world of possibility and freedom. No, they're going to be like, oh my god, I am chained by my potential in this MMO. No. And then you're sad if you don't complete all the things. So with this, because it's no longer about playing the game, right? It's no longer like actually about playing WoW.
No, it's
about removing potential FOMO.
Yeah.
And the hyper optimization stuff.
Yeah.
And it's kind of tricky because it's completely missing the forest for the trees. But it is a game with loot. It is a game with numbers. So there is a technically optimal.
Yeah. Is that the player's fault in any capacity?
Well, it's the developer's fault because the developer creates the incentives, and the incentives create the anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a frustrating one because on paper you could understand how they got to the conclusion that replace the PvP row with delves. We're fucking gaming, boys. We're gaming. I think I don't know how much of this would have mitigated if they just went and delves gave shit gear. That would have fixed this problem and introduced a whole pile of others, such as delves are worthless. There's worthless or pointless.
Yeah, that was definitely not the thing to do.
And it's the element of they're trying to set up 3 pillars, but one pillar is just substantially easier than the rest, and that's the problem. Realistically, it's how do I put this? I don't even know how. I was trying to get an analogy of like trophies or collecting and stuff like that. It's not really super there, but I think I don't know what they should have done. All I know is every single, like, it is like behind every door there's some form of dragon. Yeah. It's just which size of dragon, which flavor of dragon, which kind of breath does it fire out is kind of the struggle they have. Where it's like we made delves not give enough gear, and no one's doing delves because they're all fucking like World War One bodies over the fucking trench walls into M+, trying to get some gear.
Yeah,
they're just piles of depleted keys blocking Blizzard's entranceway, and that's like the issue of this game being, what do you do in the game that all the systems are good at making you want to do? Gear loop. You get stronger. You upgrade your gear. You go get your, you get your achievement for finishing the weathered. What are you gonna do now? Get the achievement for finishing all the carved. Good. You can get carved for that. I need rune now, and you need gilded now. Well, you better be doing your fucking M+8s as opposed to 9s. Now you can do 8s now, and it's still like the delved progression being do your delves 8 and then into M+7 and 8 is like, no. It's not the same type of play. It's not the same difficulty of play, but it's all fundamentally linked together in gear. And you're like, I can see what feels, at least on paper, with those as the as like the entries in the system, the variables. It looks like an unsolvable problem without doing something major to gear or cutting out some players from that loop, because you're kind of going, here's your big big slide, just jamming everybody down it, and people are stuck and getting crushed. They're like, but I'm not supposed to be down here. I'm not supposed to be down here with the person who's made entirely out of spikes. This is a terrible analogy, but you know what I mean, in terms of like the gearing loop being universal across.
Yes, gear is gear
Yeah.
is gear across all different types of the game.
Yeah.
Back in the day, you used to have basically back in the day, you would have resilience, which was a stat that was only useful in PvP, but it still came out of the itemization budget of a bit of gear. That meant a PvE player will not want to get PvP gear. It created a degree of separation. If you were to implement a similar thing here, well, to do it the exact same way they used to, you would have to have a raid stat, a delve stat, and a flipping PvP stat, which would be, and a flipping dungeon stat, which would be stupid. And obviously, like, Mythic Plus and Raid have fought with each other over gear since Mythic Plus. So we have the same problem. We've just added another sort of thing to it.
Yeah, which has introduced an entirely different group of players into the gear blender, which is the kind of player who is now getting rewarded substantially more from one element of gameplay than the rest.